At the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to a man and his wife, namely, Paul and Jane. The two are dining on a fine evening in their house. The table is sparsely lit with candlelight and the husband and wife are eating in silence. The only noise that can be heard is the tinkling of cutlery as they cut their food. Jane awkwardly looks at Paul and tries to say something but decides against it. Throughout the dinner, she glances at him several times trying to start any kind of conversation to end the awkwardness. Paul, on the other hand, hardly acknowledges her. His entire focus is on his food that he seems to be enjoying greatly. Having had enough of acting like strangers, Jane wipes her hand and gets up. She picks up the bottle of wine on the table and approaches her husband. Jane hopes to stir up a conversation again, but as she tries to pour him the alcohol, he covers his glass with his palm. Jane is taken aback, but she doesn't react. Paul talks for the first time and claims that he doesn't want to drink. He calls her dear, but it does not make Jane feel any better. She simply sits back down in her seat and looks visibly hurt by her husband's lack of concern. She talks for the first time and reveals that it is their wedding anniversary, urging him to let go and drink on the occasion. Hearing this, Paul stops eating and looks her dead in the eyes, clearly annoyed by all the talking when he could be enjoying his meal in silence. He simply says that he cannot drink because he has to work the next day. When the husband doesn't even bother to explain further, Jane sighs of annoyance. To make up for him not drinking, she chugs down an entire glass of wine while not breaking eye contact with him. She puts the glass down with a sigh, proud of herself for rebelling. Still, Paul doesn't utter a word to comment on the fact, so she fills up the glass again. Before she can chug down the rest of it, Paul states that the asparagus that she made for dinner is very tender. In a last attempt to stir up a spicy conversation, Jane claims that people say asparagus is an aphrodisiac, a food that increases sexual desire and pleasure. The wife is hoping for an interesting reply from him, but is left disappointed when he asks her where she heard that from. She stammers and claims that she heard it from some people. Jane appears to have gotten nervous after the question. She quickly puts food in her mouth to keep from talking, but it doesn't go unnoticed by the husband. Paul doesn't question her further and they settle back to their old routine. Only a few seconds later, he calls her dear and asks her about her day. This is the last straw for Jane. When the anger gets the best of her, she gets up and throws her just-filled glass of wine to Paul's face. Having enough of his nonchalant and uptight behavior, she asks him to shut up and have a drink for once. She also comments that he is only a mere computer analyst and not a surgeon, so nothing is going to change if he drinks a glass of wine for a special occasion. Throughout her screaming, Paul remains calm and composed. The fact that his face is covered in wine doesn't seem to bother him as much. Jane again asks him to relax for once in his life. The husband ignores her entirely and brings out his case of cigarettes to have a smoke. An already furious Jane glows red in anger after seeing him put a cigarette to his mouth. She whispers to him to not dare smoke, but it doesn't stop the husband. He lights the cigarette up and takes a big puff, making Jane get up and snatch the cigarette away from his lips. She claims that the house is hers, so he will have to do what she wants. She presses the cigarette on an ashtray, but turns around to see that Paul has lit another one. The husband waits for another glass of wine to his face, but it never comes. To his utmost surprise, Jane composes herself and sits down in her seat. She sarcastically encourages him to keep going, stating that passive smoke is exactly what she wanted as her anniversary gift. Paul doesn't answer, so she keeps talking to fill the silence. Jane claims that she only gets the privilege of stilted conversations with her husband on a normal day. She ironically adds that if she is extremely lucky, she might get a short mechanical sexual intercourse from him. The insult hurts Paul's feelings and he finally shows a hint of emotion on his face. He stares at her with teary eyes, which brings Jane back from her angered state. She regretfully apologizes for saying that. Moments later, she walks up to him and sits on his lap trying to console him like a child. She claims that she didn't mean what she said, but Paul is not naive to believe her words. Jane hugs him and slowly slides her hands down the back of his head. One might think she is trying to seduce him, but she turns off a switch on his neck. Paul goes limp after that. It is then revealed that he is actually a robot that Jane has brought from a robotics company that provides AI boyfriend services. She sits back in her place, this time with her feet on the dining table, and wishes her former husband a happy anniversary. A while later, she is on her laptop browsing for a new husband on the robotic company's website. After looking for some time, she finds the one she likes, a man who is athletic and way more interesting than the current one. She calls the company and complains that she is unsatisfied with the model of man she owns. The operator apologizes for the inconvenience and asks her what problems she is facing. Jane claims that Paul lacks ambition and has no sense of adventure. He is just too much of a robot to be a good husband. The operator claims that lack of ambition is a common malfunction with the series of robots that Paul belongs to. She asks Jane the features she would like her updated husband to be incorporated with. Jane says that she wants a more athletic man who either does rock climbing or is a masseuse. She looks at a reference photo and asks for a man with less beard and shorter blonde hair. After providing all the information on what she wants him to look like, Jane waits for the delivery that will happen the same night. Only some hours later, someone knocks on her door. She peeks through the looking hole to make sure it is the people she was waiting for. She opens it to find a woman from the robotics company standing outside. Seconds later, she is joined by another woman with the box of her preferred husband. The workers take the new man out of the plastic bag and place him on his seat at the dining table. Jane is left speechless after seeing his handsome face, although he looks identical to the previous Paul, only a bit blonder. They put the old one in a stretcher and take him out. However, Jane cannot help but stop them to wish her former husband goodbye for the last time. She runs to him and gently kisses him on the lips, regretful that she has to let him go, but happy that she has an upgraded husband now. Following that, she pulls out the wedding ring from his finger and lets the worker take him away. She then brings the ring inside and makes her new husband wear it. The upgraded version of Paul is already fitted with his old memories, so Jane will not have to bother to introduce herself and take their relationship from the start. She simply turns his switch on and continues having dinner as she did with the former Paul. The upgraded Paul wakes up and eats his first bite of food. Jane waits for him to say something, but he doesn't. However, she doesn't appear to be disappointed. She offers him a glass of wine, but like the previous Paul, this one also declines and claims that he has a big climb the next day. Proving how similar he is to the not upgraded version, he also comments that the asparagus is very tender. However, something shifts in the conversation following that. Jane starts to act submissive like the not upgraded Paul did. She affirms that the vegetable is in fact good and doesn't continue the conversation. To spice up the conversation, the upgraded Paul claims that asparagus is aphrodisiac. He expects her to reply to his comment with something interesting, but just like the previous Paul, she asks him where he heard that from. She calls him dear and doesn't converse much. It is almost as if Paul is tired of her being nonchalant to their wedding anniversary. Paul gets up from his seat and walks towards her. Jane is nervous and confused as to what he is about to do. He takes her by surprise and starts to seductively massage her shoulders. As she melts in his touch, he asks her about her day. The last time he asked her the same question ended up in him being showered with wine. However, something has changed this time because Jane is more nervous than angry. She replies to his question, saying that she went to the town to get some stuff for dinner tonight. Jane can hardly focus on what she is trying to say as Paul touches her appealingly. The stress she had from dealing with the older one vanishes as she relaxes in his touch. He urges her to continue, so she explains how she went out for lunch with her friend. As she speaks, she cannot stop smiling at the thought of having such a wonderful husband who gives her massages and is considerate enough to ask her about her day. She continues to talk and proudly says that she treated herself for the anniversary. 1 second, she is talking about her day, and the other, her expression changes and she stops abruptly. A click sound is heard from the back. Paul doesn't react to his wife going limp. In contrast, he simply walks away. When the camera pans to the back of Jane's head, we see that she also has a switch on the back of her neck that Paul has just turned off. Only then, it is revealed that she is also a robot. The updated version of Paul was too advanced for her, so he found her boring, similar to what she thought of the former Paul. This is the reason that all three of them often repeated each other's words and didn't realize it. They were manufactured by the same company, which means that their primary behavior is the same. Paul simply sits on the couch with a lit cigarette and a bottle of beer. He puts his feet on top of the coffee table and turns the TV on. In the last scene, he stares into the television, watching a football match. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification